What's up guys, it's Tom here and welcome to a video where we will react to the Manchester City court case that they lost against the Premier League, and we will explore the implications of the court case, because this court case proves that fair market value sponsorship deal rules are legit and they are here to stay, even though Man City wanted completely to abolish and delete those rules and remove them from the Premier League rulebook. They failed, and now the Premier League can punish them for the 115 or 130 charges of financial fair play rule breaches against Manchester City. But first, David Lynch, a Liverpool correspondent journalist, has reacted to the media coverage around the Manchester City court case. He labeled that embarrassing and depressing. David Lynch described the media coverage around Man City's legal battles as pathetic, criticizing what he sees as a willingness to gloss over serious issues for the sake of some journalists maintaining access to the club of Manchester City. David Lynch said, "Man City seems intent on stretching this out, attempting to pick apart the case piece by piece to prolong the process, and we know that they have been done the same with the 115 charges against them, because they obstructed and delayed the Premier League investigation at every single possible moment. They failed to provide documents and emails that the Premier League requested and that Man City are legally obliged to provide to the Premier League. They failed to provide those documents for years, delaying the process." And David Lynch views this situation as a litmus test for the integrity of English football and the effectiveness of the regulatory bodies. He said, "This stuff is absolutely depressing, that we have to go through this and that this is happening in football." Some journalists' coverage of the case is pathetic, according to David Lynch. And yeah, some journalists are shills of Manchester City, and they are basically towing the Man City line, and they are either getting paid by Manchester City directly or they are trying to maintain access to Manchester City as a football club. And David Lynch was very critical of how some media outlets very quickly reported that Man City were the winners of the court case against the Premier League, when in fact they lost 23 of 25 challenges, legal challenges that they put against the Premier League. Man City lost 23 of the 25 of them. David Lynch said that a more thorough analysis revealed that Man City's win was minor and largely procedural. He said, "The way some journalists have spun this as a win for Man City is embarrassing. They had minor success on small technical points, but did not undermine the overall case. It's one thing to take a favorable brief for trivial matters, but when it's something that could tear apart the fabric of the sport of football, that's an entirely different issue." And this highlights a broader concern for David Lynch, the integrity of football governance in England. He suggested that Man City's efforts to challenge the Premier League's regulations could have far-reaching consequences, not only for Man City, but for other clubs as well. David Lynch warned that if Man City's legal strategies succeed in delaying or weakening financial fair play enforcement, then other clubs might feel emboldened to exploit financial loopholes in the future, and other clubs might sue the Premier League as well. If Man City didn't cheat, David Lynch reflected, then fair enough, but then go prove it in the courts. But their efforts to delay and complicate the case do nothing to ease suspicions. If Man City were innocent, why not just hand in all the evidence that they have that they are innocent? Why delay the case, and why try to prolong it for as long as possible? And hopefully there will be a swift and fair resolution. David Lynch remarked, "It would be nice if Man City just took their medicine and accepted the punishment, but I don't expect that will happen. Even if Man City loses, they will likely declare a victory or find ways to undermine the decision, suggesting that the only real winners in this situation are the lawyers on both sides, who get paid tens of millions of pounds for this case." And David Lynch very well said, this is not where football should be. It's depressing, and we can only hope for a resolution that prioritizes fairness and integrity. So I wanted to share this before diving into the main topic of this video. You know, what's the furor around Premier League shareholder loans? Because that's the one aspect that Man City won against the Premier League. But there is a lot of misinformation flying around, so I want to put it right by clarifying the situation. So companies need cash to manage their operations, day-to-day, week-to-week operations. They need cash to invest in their growth. That cash can be generated from operations, but sometimes they need more than they generate. In football, a good example would be when building a new stadium or training ground. A big one-off expensive development that will be used for many years, but which will cost a lot more to develop in the short term than what operations will generate. So where does the money to do this come from? It's called capital. It could come from the company's owners or third parties such as banks providing loans, and this capital can come in two primary different ways: debt and equity. And debt for large sums is typically provided in loans or bonds. Equity is capital from issuing shares. The club sells shares to existing or new owners, the shareholder gets shares, and the club gets money for the shares sold. There are many different shapes, share types though, and some look far more like debt than equity. There are also debt instruments that look more like equity, so it's not clear-cut. Many factors matter, including who the transaction is with and their rights and the rights of the company. A shareholder loan is a loan made by someone who owns the company or part owns the company. So what's the issue with these shareholder loans when it comes to Man City and the Premier League clubs? The Premier League has profit and sustainability rules which limits loss making by the clubs to, I think, £105 million across any 3-year period in the past. Losses happen when expenses exceed revenues, obviously. When a club is injected with capital, so either a loan or equity or bonds, this does not directly affect revenue and expenses, so PSR is not directly impacted. But with debt or debt-like equity, PSR can be affected. That is because the interest is considered an expense and included in PSR calculations. For example, if you borrow £100 million and the interest is 5%, you will have a 5 million interest charge. Your first year of financing cost is 5 million. That is 5 million expense for PSR calculations. The higher the borrowing and interest rates, the greater the financing charge, the greater the expense, and as such, harder it is to clear these profit and sustainability rules. There is a subset of rules known as associated party transaction rules, basically the making sure that the sponsorship deals are fair market value. They apply to any transaction where the two parties, the club and the other party, are meaningfully connected. If two clubs in different countries have the same owner and they sell a player contract from one to the other, this would be an associated party transaction. If the owner of a club uses a different company they own to sponsor the club, that is also associated party transaction, and the rules require these to be fair market value. They need to be commercially viable and not a subsidy. They need for all transactions to be at fair market value existed before the need for all transactions to be at fair market value existed before these APT rules were introduced in 2021. They have been that easy ever since PSR was introduced, but the APT rules were introduced as a means of making this rule harder to subvert, which Man City was discovered to be doing. They were breaking the rules and hiding it. The APT rules were designed to make that much harder for them and others to do in the future, like Newcastle or Chelsea. The issue at hand is that Man City sued the Premier League to challenge these associated party transaction rules. Man City's ambition in suing the Premier League on these rules was actually about finding a way to minimize the upcoming sanctions they will face at the different hearing, the 115 charges against Man City. As part of that, they attacked these associated party transaction rules in every way they could. could. And two attacks were particularly concerning the very recent APT rule changes that would be described as unfair, which carries burden of proof and who has access to comparative benchmarking information, the database which contains all the previous sponsorship deals and associated party transactions, and the process. The Premier League was too slow to act on these fair market value assessments. Because of this, Man City could be entitled to compensation. Of course, this is not guaranteed because the Tribunal actually also deemed the Premier League's fair market value assessment as not unreasonable. All of Man City's other numerous attacks against these rules failed, bar one: the legitimacy of excluding shareholder loans as associate party transactions. So why were these loans excluded from APTs? The simplest reason is 95% of the clubs wanted it this way and no one objected. At a deeper level, it was argued that it was good for the game. There are a number of exemptions to PSR rules, for example, expenses on the local community, women's team, academy, infrastructure like a stadium or training facility are excluded as expenses in the profit and sustainability rule calculations. This is because they are considered good for the game and there is push to encourage them and not to discourage them. The same applies to the investment. PSR is to prevent financially risky behavior and prevent market distortion through non-commercial subsidy. But Premier League owners are encouraged to invest and develop for the benefit of financial stability for individual clubs and the league as a whole. So were Man City wronged by the rules on shareholder loans? No, they were not. The Tribunal decided that these shareholder loans should not be excluded from the associated party transaction rules, but Man City were never disadvantaged by this rule. First off, no one ever voted against their exemption from APT rules. 19 clubs out of 20 voted for this rule, including Manchester City, and one abstained, and that was Chelsea. Secondly, the Tribunal was clear that these rules were not applied in a discriminatory way. Of course, some propaganda journalists are trying to imply that a small group of clubs forced these rules at the expense of others in order to get an unfair advantage, but that's a lie. 19 out of 20 clubs voted for it, nobody voted against it. One club decided not to vote, and the Tribunal was clear in this. Also, anyone was able to use them, and most clubs have. No one has ever brought this up as an issue before until now. Man City did not do so because they were adversely affected by it. They do not need commercial loans, given they have the resources to always add capital in the form of equity. This made this challenge as a means of helping them avoid the most severe sanctions for their past cheating. That's what this is all about. Man City wanted to avoid the most severe sanctions for breaking 115 rules of financial fair play and other rules, of course. So why did actually the Tribunal say that excluding shareholder loans is unlawful then? The Tribunal made a decision that excluding shareholder loans from associated party transaction rules was unlawful because it was incompatible with competition law. In simple terms, their decision was constructed as follows. A shareholder is an associated party. A shareholder loan is an alternative to a commercial loan, so they are comparable. A shareholder could provide a loan at a lower interest rate than a commercial third party would do, as somebody like a bank or any other financial institution. As such, when applying PSR, shareholder loans provide unfair competitive advantage over commercial loans unless the fair market value is assessed and adjusted. Therefore, it is unlawful to exclude them from associated party transaction rules. And I think that's fair. The problem with this is that it's an incredibly poorly constructed decision that demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of corporate financing strategy and decision making. Comparing shareholder loans to commercial loans is like comparing a koala bear to a polar bear, just because they are both called bears, when actually it is far more similar to a wombat. Great analogy. So koala bear in this instance is shareholder loan, polar bear, commercial loan, wombat is equity. So the decision is constructed upon an erroneous comparison, but the decision has been made now, and it looks as if the Premier League aren't intending to appeal, so no point to dwell on this. So it was just barely wrong to exempt shareholder loans from associated party transaction rules. The tribunal compared PSR and APT rules with UEFA's rules as a means of comparing appropriateness. UEFA rules exclude the costs of financing infrastructure from its own financial rules, and the majority of the most significant shareholder loans all relate to these infrastructure costs. Everton, Brighton and Arsenal are the three clubs with the largest shareholder loans. All three incurred these loans as a result of financing new stadiums. The issue of any loans being below fair market value would be the moot for UEFA rules. If the Premier League and clubs had known Man City strongly objected to the rules and believed they contravened competition law, they could have restructured them to be more like UEFA's rules instead. But if clubs had known Man City took issues with the rules, then they could have injected equity instead of shareholder loans, like Man City did. No one has been disadvantaged by these rules any more than they have been by Man City injecting equity. To assert otherwise is a lie. And following the tribunal's line of decision making could mean excluding equity from APTs is contrary to competition law. Two, the tribunal were very clever that they were not posed that question. One for Man City fans to think about. The fact is, with the resources at their disposal and the construction of the rules, Man City were in the best position here regarding the rules on shareholder loans. They brought action to try and help their cheating, and they hurt others in the process, not to rectify damage to them. And here you can see how much money the current Premier League clubs owed their owners in the 22-23 season. This is millions of pounds. So Everton, Brighton and Arsenal owed the most. Chelsea, Liverpool, Leicester, Bournemouth next. And yeah, Man City, Newcastle, Tottenham, West Ham owed nothing, just like Man United as well. So Man City are asserting that all APT rules are null and void until they are fixed, and they are writing to clubs with threatening letters to try and delay fixing them. They want the rules broken so they can take advantage. PSR still applies, but there could be a hole in it now. A loophole for clubs owned by states and oligarchs in order to pump in money in a non-commercial way, but hopefully maybe not. Just because Man City say the APT rules are null and void, it doesn't mean that they are. The tribunal still has to provide clarity on that. A blue pencil test needs to be undertaken where they cross out the unlawful rules and determine whether what's left is still lawful and able to be applied. If it is, the other APT rules stand. If not, the whole set of APT rules will be void until they are fixed. I believe that the blue pencil test applies for shareholder loans. They are excluded through a specific subclause in a definition of the term transaction. As such, even if they are unlawful, I don't see a world where Man City could successfully argue that they void the rule as a class. The other rules deemed unlawful is another matter. The rules should be reverted back to how they were at the start of the year. I can understand why the Premier League pulled the vote on the shareholder loans. There is disagreement from the clubs on how to deal with this, and they didn't have the votes. However, they should have no problem reversing the other rules, and any club who would refuse to vote for a reversal would be treading on very dangerous ground. There is no legitimate reason to deny this. It's not amending the rules to something new, it's reversing amendments deemed unlawful to previously agreed rules. That should not require any debate or review. If they were reversed, the APT rules should hold. So the natural conclusion is anyone denying such a vote is acting in bad faith. So that's the summary. Wow, that was a work. That's the summary of what is going on. I hope that you guys could digest all this information included in this video. You can pause the video at any time if you want, and hopefully you took a lot of things on board and a lot of new information. It's also very new to me as well, so I apologize if I mispronounced any words. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed this. Have a nice day. See you later. Goodbye.